want to take you back to my younger days. I was in South Bend. My brother was actually a youth pastor. I've done a lot of different things in ministry. Youth pastor is not one of them. But he was a youth pastor, so I got dragged along for everything that was going on. But we used to play a game, and I don't know if I'd call it a game, but it was really an activity that we would do in youth meetings sometimes. And we would call it the alphabet game. And you're familiar with the alphabet game, but this is it starts with A. But we would do this. We'd say, okay, everybody share, and we'd just have kids shout out, give an attribute of God that starts with the letter A, or a characteristic of God. And some kid would say he's almighty. And then we go on and say, okay, well, how about the letter B? And somebody might say, well, God is beautiful, or God is big, or God is the God who blesses us. And then we get to C, and they would say C would be like, well, God is caring, or God is compassionate, or God is our comforter. And D would be defender, and E, everlasting. And so we would go through this list like this. And it was really actually a great worship experience, because we just stop and think about all of these different things that God is to us. But I want to play that game. It's not really a game this morning, but I want to do this anyhow, this activity. But I want to pick out one letter. And the letter is the letter P, as in Paul and Peter that we had up here earlier. But what is the one attribute of God that you would pick that starts with the letter P? So let me just give you a second to think about that one. What is the letter that you would pick that describes God that starts with the letter P? You got one? Okay, keep it in mind, all right? We're going to come back to it. When I do these series, and we started with Elijah back 4 weeks ago, full confession here, I don't work a long ways in advance. Some people can do that. I'm not very good at doing that. I like for stuff to be super fresh and super current. And so usually I'm about a week ahead of you when it comes to messages. So a while back, though, I was like, I want to do something here on Elijah. And I found Elijah was super fascinating to me as we're in this road trip theme for the year, in that his life is and his ministry is so laid out on a map, and it was super easy to follow. But I learn as I go. So there's things now that I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back to the first week and fix that, or I wish I could go back to this week and fix that, because it's all kind of coming together in my mind. And this is what I have experienced here as I've worked through this series, is that God, in each of these places, he's taken them to Elijah to a place on the map, but in each of those places, there's a moment, but in that moment, he's teaching Elijah something. And that, what he teaches, kind of leads to the next thing, and he can draw from what God's taught him there for that, and that's how it goes as he goes through life. So he starts here, and he starts by what? He goes to Samaria, and then he comes back to Cherith, and that's the first week that we talked about that. And that would be the idea of God's provision, or providence would really be the big word, I guess you would say. Providence, which involves provision, and it involves guidance, and it involves protection. And God provides for Elijah there where he's at the ravine of Cherith. And it's like, okay, learn this lesson, Elijah. I am the God of providence. I'm the God who provides. I'm the God who protects. Okay, you got it? All right, now let's send you on your next step. So he goes to Zarephath, and there he meets a widow woman that God says is supposed to provide for him. And he learns something else about that, and that's promise. And so now God only doesn't protect and provide, he also fulfills his promise. So he sends him, Elijah, up here. And it's not so that you can take care of the widow here. It's so that the widow can take care of you. And God miraculously does that, but he keeps his promises, in that the fact that it's the widow's home that he lives in. It's the widow's kitchen that he eats from. And so he learns about promises. In that moment, he also learns a little bit about God's power, though, too. Because the widow's son dies, and Elijah brings him back to life. And so he takes this providence, he takes this protection, God's provision. He learns about God's promises. He experiences God's power. And then God sends him off to Carmel. And that's where we were last week. And he needs all of that because of what's going to happen there. And that's, of course, where we see so dramatically, we see God's power. takes place. And he comes down, and God's power, consumes the sacrifice. And so he sees that. He also sees God's providence, though. Because before he even gets to Carmel, he runs into Obadiah in a field somewhere. And that's nothing more than God bringing his path across Obadiah's path. So he sees his providence. But we also see his promise played out. Because at the end, remember, he goes and he prays for rain, and nothing happens, and he prays again, and he keeps sending his servant back and forth. Do you see anything? Do you see anything? But he doesn't panic when nothing happens. And we said that was where he was leaning into God's promises. And so we see this progression as he goes here. And maybe as you picked out a word in our little game there, P, maybe that was one of the words that you picked, that God is powerful, or that God is a promise keeper, or that God is a protector or a provider. Well, the next story that we have sends us, or as we continue on here, sends us back to a place called Jezreel. And we're going to pick up the story where we left off last week, right after Elijah is called down fire and defeated the prophets of Baal and then prayed for rain. Here's what happens next. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 18 to start with. 1 Kings chapter 18. And if it's helpful to you, it's on the back of the outline that we put in the bulletin there. It says, meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose and a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. And the power of the Lord came on Elijah. Tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. So he's running to Jezreel is the next action we see here. And if we go to the map there, we're kind of following these colored arrows. So orange was the first week, and purple, that was the Kerith Ravine. Green is when he went up to Zarephath. Last week was the blue and red line. Now you see a dotted line there from Mount Carmel to Jezreel. That's 25 miles that he runs. How many run a marathon? I know a few of you have. Okay, yeah. Piece of cake, right? Especially if you've not been training for it. Like, I ran a 5K and I trained like one day. It was a little hard. So there's nothing to say that Elijah was a distance runner, but he runs to Jezreel. And part of that, it says the Spirit of God came on him, and maybe the next time I run a race, I need to pray that, right? Spirit of God, come on me, please, okay? Maybe that would help. But he's also coming off the spiritual high. I mean, he's one man against 450. He's one man against this false religion. And it's a crazy experience. And he's just prayed down rain, by the way, too. And so he's on this. So maybe he was just like pumped. But he runs off there to Jezreel. Now, Jezreel is a place, and you can see on the map, Samaria is directly south of it. And you have the map in your bulletins there again, too. Samaria was the capital. Jezreel was like a second home for the royal couple of Ahab and Jezebel. So there was a palace there too. And so evidently as this story is going on, this is where kind of the activity is going. So he runs back to where the palace is located. He's at the apex of his faith. God is blessing. Things are happening. I mean, it's wild what's going on right now. I mean, people haven't seen things like this in their lifetime for sure. And we think, I mean, this guy's got to be pumped, right? But he's also got to be pretty tired. So I don't know if this is a day or 2 days, but I mean, there has been a lot that's going on between facing off with prophets and praying for rain and making a 25-mile run there. So he's got to be worn out. But he goes back to Jezreel. He's not the only one. Chapter 19, we read on. Now Ahab, he actually went back to Jezreel too. And he went back and told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. Jezebel, she had not been at Carmel, but when she gets the news here, she's not excited about it. And actually, she's determined that she's going to stand in the way of what God is doing. And so she says this in verse number 3. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah and said this, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them," one of the prophets that have been killed. Now, if I'm making a threat, I'm probably not going to invoke the gods that have just been embarrassed, but that's what Jezebel does. But we see her reacting here. Based on the report of Ahab, And so she reacts and says, I am going to make you pay for this. In fact, you're dead. If I catch up with you, you are a dead man. And it wasn't just that Elijah had discredited Baal and shown him to be a phony. In the process of that, he had also disgraced the queen, because she was the one who had brought Jezebel really to prominence here, coming in from Phoenicia there. But this queen, she was vile, and she was vindictive, and she was violent, and she was a way stronger person than Ahab was, because Ahab was like, oh no, did you see what Elijah did? And she's like, oh, Elijah, he is a dead man. But it's important to note here, in this story, her issue was not with Elijah, her issue was with God. And Elijah loses track of that. And so Elijah, who has just arrived in town, based on God's providence and protection and promise, and he's got all of these things in hand, he's got all of those cards to play, but what does he do? He folds. Verse number 3, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. And he ran to Beersheba in Judah, and there he left his servant, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. And so we see him back on the map here. And you see the big dotted line there in brown, and you can see that line on your map as well. He goes from Jezreel to Beersheba. That's a 90-mile trek. It's the southernmost town in Israel. He's going as far as he can to get away from Jezebel, and then a little bit further because he goes out a day's journey into the wilderness. But it's really important to notice something in this. This is the first time we see Elijah move on the map where God didn't direct him. And he decides on his own to go down to Beersheba. Why? Because he's afraid of a queen whose prophets just lost to God. And for some reason, he can't make that connection. Like, if God could handle the prophets, he could probably handle Jezebel too. And so he runs not to a place, which he's always done, he runs from a place. And it says, if we keep reading, it says he came to a broom bush and he sat down under it and he prayed that he might die. And he said, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no longer better than my ancestors. And what we've got here is a guy who is just out of gas. And we see him reacting to what's going on, and he's forgetting about all the great things that God just done, and he's moved into some other space here. And he can't think clearly, and his emotions kind of come to the surface. Well, here's what we see. His reaction is fourfold. First of all, he fears the queen. And for all of us, like, fear is generally the enemy. And fear, a lot of times, though, is irrational. He had no reason to be afraid of the queen. I mean, she was a Baal follower. How strong was Baal? He can't send down fire. You know, his prophets can't do anything. There was no reason to fear there, but he still felt this fear. And it's a little bit hard for me to get my head around because Elijah's such this bold guy. He marches into Ahab and says, it's not going to rain here for 3 years. See ya. And he's just like, that's kind of how, like, hey, go ahead. Just dump 12, jars of water on this fire. God can handle this. And all of a sudden, this fear thing takes over. And his fear caused his flight. Because we can go all the way back to the very beginning, Elijah at his core was just a man. And I think we can all relate with that. We've all had times in our lives where we probably should have stood and fought, should have at least stood for right, and we were just like, it's just too much, and we just kind of run in fear, and we back off in the relationship, or we back off in the opportunity, or we back off in the situation, because fear has overcome us. And he had no reason to fear, and yet he feared the queen. Secondly, I think he probably felt the letdown from Carmel. He's come down off of his mountain and his mountaintop experience, And immediately he faces opposition. And it's not like he catches a break, like, whoa, that was really hard. I just dealt with 450 prophets. Okay, I'm going to take a breather here. He comes down, and Jezebel's right in his face saying, you're dead, man. And I don't think he was even expecting that. And I think that's sometimes true in our experiences, though, too. We have a great moment spiritually. We make a decision for God. We're like, I'm going to do this. And we make a commitment to it. And we've just had this moment. And we come down from that moment, and right in our face is some type of opposition or problem or person. And this happens, and there's just nothing left in the tank, evidently. And we've all heard that. After great spiritual victories, be prepared, because then you're most vulnerable. And sometimes it's like, well, you're most vulnerable because, you're too confident. And maybe you've gotten a little cocky and like, look how much we accomplished here spiritually. And we are like, yes, we've got it together. I think it's more that we often come down from those things and we've extended ourselves spiritually. And faith is something that demands something from us, mentally, physically, emotionally, heart-wise. It's sometimes when God's calling us to these moments and we make a big decision or we experience a great victory, it has consumed a lot of our spiritual energy. And we come down from that mountain and we get confronted and we're in big trouble because we don't have enough left in the tank. And the answer isn't to run back up the mountain. The answer is to, we'll discover that in just a minute here. But Elijah may have been disappointed. Like he came down from that mountain, he was expecting a big revival. And Jezebel's like, no, guys, we're still staying with Baal here. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he thought that the people's hearts would turn. It's obvious that he's feeling pretty lonely here. But he is totally depleted physically, mentally, and emotionally. And sometimes in our life, the big things we handle, and then it's the small things that trip us up. And the reason being for that is because we don't figure out how we're going to replenish ourselves. And God knows that too, and we're going to see how God responds in just a minute in this story to Elijah. But be aware of that. We need to be constantly refueling ourselves faith-wise. We can't just keep living on the mountain, can't keep living with great challenges, can't keep overcoming them, because we don't have enough reserves to handle that. But Elijah, his reserves are gone, his emotions are getting the best of him, he's vulnerable and he's in trouble, and what does he say? He says this, I have had enough. I'm done, God. I've walked in there and I've told him it's not going to rain, and I've gone and I've had to live in Zarephath and, in heathen territory, and I've gone to the Carmel, and you know what? I'm done. You've asked a lot from me, and this is all I got, and I have had enough. Ever get there in your faith? And for different reasons too, right? Maybe it's because all the things that I've had to do, and it's like, I am just worn out from this. Or maybe it's like, I'm just frustrated with this. Or maybe it's because I'm just disappointed with this. Or maybe it's just, I don't know. But it's like, you know what? I think I kind of have enough. And so we just kind of throw it in neutral, and we just kind of cruise from there and hope that it's, the problem with cruising is it's going to go downhill if you're going to get anywhere. And so he says, I've had enough, and that causes him to do what? He flees the chaos, and that's the next thing. He's done. And he leaves the place where he is supposed to be. There's no indication that he was ever supposed to leave Jezreel. And maybe if he had just stuck it out, Jezebel was going to be the next tree to fall there. We don't know. Because he fled the chaos. And he left without God's direction, and he went to a place that was going to be easier and more convenient and a little bit more pleasant. He didn't go there, actually, I don't think, to die, because if he wanted to die like a request of God, he could have just stayed put and let Jezebel take him out. It's not a request to die. It's a complaint against God. It's like, hey, I did this, and it didn't turn out the way that I thought it should. I did this, and gosh, now I have another. We got Ahab, or I got Jezebel in my rearview mirror here, chasing me down. And he's complaining against God's injustice because he feels like he's kept his end of the bargain. And God didn't. And now look what's happened. So why would I stay in Jezreel and trust God here? Well, the reason is because he's got these cards in his pocket called God's providence and God's protection and God's power and God's promise. And those things have never changed. He's just lost sight of it. So he takes the easy way out. And sometimes that's what we do. We take the easy way out. And we don't go into the chaos because it's unpleasant or because we doubt ourselves and I'm not going to be enough for this situation, or I don't like, we predict how it's going to turn out and it's not going to be great. And so rather than deal with it, I just take off. And we flee the chaos. And what happens then is what happened to Elijah. We fail the moment. And Elijah ends up in Beersheba when he needs to be in Jezreel. And he misses his moment. And there's a really important truth here for us to remember, and it's this: that even the greatest in faith are still weak in the flesh. And I don't care how great you consider yourself to be, how mature in your faith, you still live in your flesh. And you are extremely vulnerable if you're not careful. And so Elijah's holding God's protection, his promises, his power. But instead of playing any of those cards, what does he pull out? He pulls out the cards of panic and self-pity and even a little bit of pride. I did what I was supposed to do, God. Where were you? And what are you doing here? And so it says there in verse number 5, he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. And all at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank, and then he lay down again. And here we see not the reaction of God. We see the response of God. Because God is not reacting at all to Elijah. He is responding, and he's showing Elijah, hey, here, let me show you one more thing that you don't have yet, that you haven't figured out yet. And so God takes care of Elijah. If you have a King James version, for whatever reason, there's that little header above this. It says God's gentle care for his overwrought prophet. And that's what happens here. God shows up and faithfully cares for his overwrought prophet, and he says, hey, Elijah, I know where you are. I know what you've been through. I know how tired you are. I know you're hungry too. And I know what you need. And I found you. In fact, I didn't find you. I never lost track of where you are. You know, I was hoping you'd stay in Jezreel maybe. But when you came here to Beersheba, I didn't lose track of you. I've been following with you this whole time. And now that you're out here in the wilderness, yeah, I'm still here too. Because God continued to pursue Elijah. So God is kind and God is gracious and God is, and here's the P word that I think fits right here, God is patient. And Elijah has another faith lesson to learn, and what a lesson it is. It's the patience of God. And God didn't show up and say, Elijah, you dum-dum, get back up there. God doesn't show up and even say anything to him other than say, hey, you know what, there's some food, go eat it. And while you're here, let's get some sleep. And you know, sometimes that's what God is saying to us, is like, get some sleep. You know, do what you got to do. And when we talk about being replenished, even spiritually, we have to replenish ourselves physically too. And so Elijah had gone forever, probably without sleeping, without eating, and he's running around, running marathons. He is depleted physically, but that affects him spiritually too. And we need to remember that too, is any demands in our life, whether it's physical or whether it's emotional or whether it's relational, social, These demands, mental, of our lives, they draw from the resources and the reserves that we have, but it also draws from us spiritually. And sometimes when we're in those situations in life where we're looking at the chaos in Jezreel and we're like, hey, I don't think I can do this, sometimes you just need to go lie down. I remember many years ago, one of my nieces showed up at my house, and she was engaged to be married, and she was all distraught. And she's like, I don't know, Uncle Brent. I just don't, and Kelly will remember this, I don't know if I should be marrying him or whatever I think about this. What do you think I should do? And I was like, well, like, how much you been working lately? And she's like, I don't know, 60, 70 hours. And I'm like, you know what I do? I go take a nap. And we were actually going on vacation the next day. We were like, hey, how about if we do this? You just watch our house while we're gone, and you get some rest, okay? She's very happily married to that guy now and has been for years. But God offers Elijah's patience, but God offers us his patience. He knows that we get strung out. He knows that we get worn down, and he knows enough to give us what we need. And sometimes it's bread and water. Sometimes it's a friend that comes to our place. Sometimes it's something that you read or something that you hear. But God's patience is not like, okay, I'm rejecting you, I'm done with you. God's patience is like, okay, how do we fix this now? How do we fix you? Verse number 7, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Okay, I read that too fast. The Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Just kind of hold that phrase there. So he got up and he ate and drank, and strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and he spent the night. And Mount Horeb is the same as Mount Sinai. So he goes to the place that Moses has been. And so we can see this on the map. We're all the way down in the very bottom corner now. That's Mount Horeb. And this time, my assumption is that God sends him there. We're never told that for sure. But here's why I think that might be true. Because when he says, the journey is too much for you, I think that's referring to the future. I've got a journey for you, and it's going to be too much if you don't eat something here. And so he eats, and either he eats enough that it sustains him for the next 40 days, miraculously, or for the next 40 days, God continues to provide food. It could be that as well. But God is sending them off to Horeb. And what God does, and I love this in the story, he takes Beersheba, and instead of making it a destination, he makes it a little detour. And where God has always sent Elijah to a place, and Elijah runs to Beersheba on his own, God's kind of like, okay, and keep right on going here, Elijah. And let's meet up again here at Horeb in this place. And I think sometimes that's how God looks at our failures, and we blow it and we mess it up spiritually. For whatever reason, we have our mountaintop moment, and then maybe we come crashing down or whatever. And we're like, okay, I failed God, and I don't know if I want to do this, and it's enough for me, God. And God's like, okay, let's just keep right on going here. And let's go over here to Horeb. Because I'm going to meet you there, and we're not going to get there this week. We're going to get there next week. But he gets there, and God is waiting for him. And it's a pretty incredible thing here, too. Because when he gets there, well, if you go back to that last phrase in verse number 9, it says, there he went into a cave and spent the night. The word a cave there in the Hebrew language is actually a definite. He went into the cave, is what it says, and spent the night. And there's speculation, and nobody knows if this is true or not, but do you remember the story of Moses? When God told him to stand in the cleft of the rock and his glory passed by? It could be that God took Elijah back to that exact same place, the cave. And we're going to see next week what actually happens when he's in this cave. But then goes on, and it says here, in the next phrase, the word of the Lord came to him, Elijah, and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And now God has finally said, okay, we're not going to deal with this in Beersheba. We're kind of going to get your strength built back. And then we're going to come down here to Horeb, and then you and I, we're going to have a conversation. And that conversation starts with this question, what are you doing here? And it's really hard to understand what God's asking here in this moment. What are you doing here? So let me just give you 3 options here. And any one of these 3 could be correct, and they could be a combination of the same. But when he says, what are you doing here? He could be saying to Elijah, how did you end up here? Or how did you get in this state? I mean, you were doing great. You were winning great contests. You were playing great prayers. What's happened to you, Elijah? It could have been that. Or it could have been, what are you doing here, Elijah? Why aren't you still in Jezreel? Like, why didn't you just stick it out? Why did you give her a win? She didn't need to get a win. Or he could have said, meant this. What are you doing here, Elijah? Meaning, why do you think I brought you here, Elijah? You know, like, I saw you in Beersheba. It's like, I got to get you to Horeb here. But even as he gets him to Horeb, it's not very direct. From Beersheba to Horeb, he should have been able to cover that distance in 10 to 14 days. And it takes him 40. Because God's like, okay, I think, got your attention again here. And we're going to start working on this road to recovery, and we're going to take our time to get here. And yes, we're going through the wilderness, but God works us in the wilderness. And God says, okay, now you're following me. Now you're going, and now you're to the place. Oh, you know where you are? You're at Sinai. You're where Moses was, Elijah. Why are you here? And I think there's a lot of hope in that question too. Like God said, okay, I brought you to this place because I have something more to show you. And I love that verse 9. The word of the Lord comes. Elijah has failed. He's folded when he's had great cards to play. And God could have just given up on him, and God's like, no. I get it, you're a man. I get it, you're flesh. I get it that you're strung out and that you're worn out and that you're tired out and that you're hungry. I get all that, Elijah. And so you know what? Here's what I want you to get. I want you to get not just my protection, not just my provision, not just my power, not just my promises. I want you to get the fact that I am a patient God. Aren't you glad? Because I don't relate very well to Elijah on Carmel. I relate a lot better to Elijah in Beersheba. Like, those big moments, those seem beyond me sometimes. Those moments where I'm tired and worn out and where I don't feel like I can do this and I don't want to do it anymore and I want to say, okay, I've had enough. That's when God says, okay, here, you know what? There's some food. Here's something to drink. Go ahead, get some sleep. And then when you're ready, we're going to move you on here to the next thing. And he gets Elijah's story back on track because that's what God does, because he's a patient God. I'm not giving up on you. And that's the word that comes to each of us from God. He is not giving up on you. Well, nobody knows my secret. God does, and he's not giving up. Well, nobody knows how bad I feel. God does. He's not giving up. Well, he's not giving up. He's patient. And so that's the question, I guess, I'd like to ask you this morning, is the same one God asked Elijah. What are you doing here? But where is your here? Maybe you're in Jezreel. You're still riding that spiritual high, but you know that you're depleted. And you know that you've got a difficult foe that you're going to face here. And you're afraid and you're tempted to run. What can you do if you're still in Jezreel to set yourself up for success, to keep yourself planted, to keep yourself from bailing? Maybe you've already fled to Beersheba because it felt like the easiest thing to do, but maybe it was because you didn't know what else to do. And now you've sat under some broom bush long enough and you've said, I'm done. And you're feeling sorry for yourself and you're a little peeved at God. And you know you're not where you're supposed to be. And maybe you're in Beersheba. And maybe you need to look up, though, and say, okay, God, I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I desperately need your patience right now. We have limitations, and God knows that. And God can help us get ourselves replenished. Maybe right now God's calling you to Horeb, or you're there. You just need to get alone with him. And you need to experience his grace and his patience. And you need to realize that maybe that just was, a detour there in Beersheba. That God's still got big dreams and big plans for you. See, Elijah's story, it's not over yet. You got to come back next week to find out what happens at Horeb. He's learned about God's provision. He's learned about God's promises and God's power. And he's learned about God's patience, but there's still more to learn, because we have a God that is taking us through life, place by place, situation by situation, teaching us something about himself at every stop so that we can experience him in that way. And he's got the next place already set up and ready for us. We just have to follow him to get there. Let's pray. God, thank you for this story of Elijah, and thank you for the encouragement and just hope that it brings to us, because we failed in so many times and so miserably, and you're a God who is patient, and we thank you for that. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. The question is, where are you? Are you in Jezreel? You need to get recommitted before you take off and run. Maybe you've already run and you need to get committed to God. Maybe you've actually are headed towards Horeb, where you're like, I am going to get myself totally plugged back into God here. I don't know where you are. Maybe where you are is you need to pull on one of these resources that God says, my power, my promises, my protection, even my patience. Will you do that this morning? Maybe the place where you are, though, is not even connected to God. It's in Waterford or wherever it happens to be, Clarkston or Commerce or wherever. But are you connected to God? Have you ever accepted Christ as your personal Savior, invited him into your life? Where are you? So God wants you to be on the journey with him, and he wants to be on the journey with you. But you have to give your life to him. And maybe that's where you are this morning. It's like, I'm ready to give my life to a God who is powerful and who can protect me and who keeps his promises. But I'm also ready to give my life to a God who's patient. Maybe you're there. You can do that where you sit this morning. God, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your determination to follow us, to never abandon us, to never give up on us. I pray that this week we would be reminded of all that you are, from your protection to your patience. And we pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.